Hi there, folks. Welcome to this podcast where we're discussing one of the most important trials going on in Scotland at the present time, where an environmental activist, Don Staniford, is fighting back against a Norwegian multinational company who are trying to impose rights they should have no right to own on the people of Scotland. Now, I'm delighted to say, by Don Staniford today. But first of all, I'm going to a well-known face to readers and viewers of Scotland, our legal eagle, Ewan Kennedy in Argyll, who is going to explain what a SLAPP is in terms that the layman will understand. So Ewan, can you explain the legal mechanism in play here?
Yes, well, for 2 minutes, I'll try and take you through very briefly the history of SLAPPs and where we've now arrived. The acronym SLAPP stands for a Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. It's a term that was invented in the United States in the late 1980s, and it arose out of people who felt they were being victimized by gigantic corporations through the law courts. And American judges recognized the constitutional right to freedom of speech, and they started throwing out cases on the grounds they said that they were vexatious. So from the 1980s, it has grown and it has spread worldwide. Start off by saying, what is a SLAPP? What is a, is there any legal definition? And at the moment, there isn't a particularly agreed legal definition, but there's been a lot of discussion about this, and there's an organization based in Malta called Case Europe, which does its best to register cases that they recognize as SLAPPs. And the definitions that they use are that, first of all, the case is brought by either a very wealthy individual or a corporation, and it brings the case to court because it has something to hide. And its victim, the target, is public participation in the exposure of wrongdoing. This is the briefest way I can put it. So that where you have an individual such as, notably in the United Kingdom recently, Carol Cadwallader, who decided to expose certain aspects of Arran banks, you have a fairly classic SLAPP on the face of things. The remedy sought is usually quite disproportionate. And of course, one of the things that's used is the enormous financial cost. And I would say that it's notorious that the law courts in London seem to have made almost an industry out of SLAPPs, and it's something that has started to worry politicians down south enormously, to such extent that they have, within the last year, actually passed legislation which doesn't cover all SLAPPs, but it covers some of them. And the problem really is how a judge can be expected to recognize if the case in front of him or her could be described as vexatious. And typically the case is brought, a lot of these cases are brought with no real prospect of success. And I think we'll be discussing Don Staniford's case in more detail in a few minutes. But if you're clever about bringing a SLAPP, you bring a case that has got, let's say it's got 5 headings, or in this particular case, it might have 4 headings, different things that you say that your victim has been doing. And one of those is legally perhaps arguable, and the rest of them are just hopeless. So that you try to get your foot in the door of the court by saying, don't throw my case out, it has got some kind of a prospect of success. And so that sort of muddies the waters quite a bit, and you can take it there are very clever people on the legal front in very large law firms working out the best way to run these things to actually get them into court. So far, I don't think we've had any thrown out in the court in Scotland. We've had very, very few. I think there's been 3 or 4 officially recognised by the Case Europe people, and one of them, the most recent one, is in fact the one we're talking about today.
Thanks very much, Ewan. That's very helpful. Dawn, if I can come to you, can you just outline for those watching what it is that you actually do? Why do you do it? And what's its importance?
Okay, yeah. So very briefly, I used to work in the late 90s in Edinburgh for Friends of Scotland. So I've campaigned against salmon farming for over 25 years. And about 6 years ago in 2018, for the first time, I put a small camera on a telescopic stick inside a salmon cage. So what I do is I go out in a kayak early in the morning or late in the evening when there's no one on a salmon farm, and I take undercover footage inside the farm. And my footage has appeared in various TV shows, on the news. So I'm exposing welfare abuse. Sometimes I uncover health and safety breaches or environmental problems, but I'm effectively like a quasi-journalist. I'm going out there to gather evidence of welfare problems on salmon farms. And this court case has been triggered because of the success of that surveillance, and a Norwegian salmon farm giant, Maui, which is the world's largest salmon farm company, they started threatening me with a lawsuit back in 2019 when I first filmed in their farms. And this case came to court the start of February 2024 on appeal. So I think it's a very significant case. It's on the face of it just against myself, but it raises huge implications for other water users. This is effectively a Norwegian multinational trying to privatize the public commons, the public seas in Scotland.
Yeah, Don, I think I'm correct in saying that some of the things they were seeking in the original case was they wanted to put a ban on anybody approaching a fish farm within 15 metres, I think it was. It was also looking to restrict the airspace over fish farms so that people could not fly drones over them. You know, so I think you also supply information voluntarily to the likes of SEPA and the other authorities, some of which I believe SEPA, for instance, had all their computers hacked. So they've not been in a very good position to monitor what's been happening on these farms for a period. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think one of the underlying reasons why myself and there are others go out there for surveillance is because the regulatory authorities, whether it's SEPA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, or Marine Scotland, aren't doing their jobs properly, whether that's due to a cyber hack or COVID or just under resources. So we're going out into the field. We're providing concrete footage that sources journalists. Vicky Allen from the Herald newspaper came out with us in August, and she wrote about the case in December, describing it as David versus 3 Goliaths. So it's myself, not just against Maui, but also 2 other companies. So they're trying to stop myself and others. But what happened at the start of February was 3 planks of Maui's argument were just destroyed. It was like a house of cards built on sand. It was just destroyed. And there will be some sort of judgment maybe towards the end of March. So I also want to plug at the end of February, there's the Scottish Anti-SLAPP Summit at Glasgow University, organised by Index on Censorship. That's on the 26th of February, where people can find out more information on SLAPPs. My case was the 5th case in Scotland You may have also read about Andy Whiteman's case. He will also be speaking as well. So this is really the thin end of the wedge. And there's probably dozens of SLAPPs in Scotland, but one of the things these multinationals are doing are they're trying to silence criticism, whether it's in terms of surveillance or free speech. And we may just not be hearing about SLAPPs. My case and others could just be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, if I can come back to Ewan, people need to fight for freedoms and to defend them, but it's not a cheap thing to do. It can be very expensive. I believe Don's legal fees are somewhere in the region of £25,000. Now, as he says, he's had some success in so much as the attempt to put a blockage round the immediate area of the fish farms. That's been withdrawn by Maui. They've now abandoned trying to control the airspace. But nevertheless, none of these things might have happened if it hadn't been for Don being brave enough to challenge them. Yeah. What about the expense here? Is that the tactic to the corporations plan to just outspend any individual?
Well, I think the 25,000 would be a very serious underestimate if Don's legal team were not basically working as a matter of concern for the environment and as a matter of goodwill. Yeah. And I have to say, I have a huge respect. I'm not involved in this because I was delighted to send my practicing license back to the Law Society many years ago. And but of course, I'm afraid once you're a lawyer, always a lawyer. You never escape from it. So it doesn't. I'm involved in this personally because I live in an area where there's a lot of fish farms, and I've seen exactly the damage that they do for many, many years. And I'm absolutely delighted to contribute by way of research, looking up preparing spreadsheets of lists of mortalities and all sorts of stuff. That's all done free, gratis, and for nothing. But the actual legal input is far more heavy because these guys have done a fantastic job in putting all the documentation together. You've got court fees, you've got this, that, and the other. 25,000 wouldn't even look at it. If we manage to make some money, it'll cover the basic court costs. My hunch would be that if these guys have been working flat out, and don't forget this case started in 2021, and we've been through a court in Oban which ruled against Don. We thought that the judgment was completely wrong, and we took an appeal, and then the costs in the appeal court come a lot higher. We've got a fantastic legal team. We've got Jamie Whittle, a very brilliant lawyer in the Scottish Highlands. We've got his assistants, Lewis and Emma, and then we've got Simon Crabb, who in my mind is just one of the most brilliant young advocates you'll ever come across. He's fundamentally decent, hardworking, committed, clever, and he's never asked for any money. And then when we got to the appeal court, we had to bring in John Campbell, and John probably is nearly the same kind of generation as I am, and he's also committed to protecting our Scottish public asset. The seabed belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to King Charles. It doesn't belong to the Crown Estate. Hold it in trust for all of us. And I was just going to say, I have a bit of an interest in legal history, but you can go back 400 years, and funnily enough, you have the Scottish king very angry that the Dutch fishermen are coming and lifting our herring. They think the herring belonged to Scotland, and of course they don't. The herring don't know that the herring aren't aware of where they're swimming. So the Scottish king got professor at St Andrews University to put out into the international domain that the king should control the coastline, and the Dutch got a guy called Hugo Grotius, is his Latin name, Hugo de Groot, and he eventually put out a book called Mare Liberum, so Latin for free seas, and that has become recognized in international law. So what we now have is a sort of reincarnation of the Dutch herring fisherman, reincarnation of King Canute in the shape of John Frederickson, the owner of one of the biggest fish farm company in the world, claiming that he can outdo everybody. He can outdo the ancient King of Scotland, who on this particular occasion was on the wrong side of the argument. So this case raises huge issues. But what you really asked me to say was the chilling effect of these SLAPPs. As Don said, you get a threat from a lawyer. If you don't withdraw that podcast, if you don't take that tweet down, we're going to sue the guts out of you, and your life's going to be misery. And it's not just expense, it's the fact that Don's had this hanging over his head for, 2.5 years? And before that, he was getting threats for years from these mega law firms telling him that if he continued doing what he was doing, they were going to take him to court. I think they really only took him to court when he started getting into the mainstream press with a vengeance. And of course, it reflects, I think, quite badly on some sections of the Scottish media, although we've now had some. I think you've been in the national newspaper, and I think you've been in the Herald, which is quite interesting. But it's actually been the kind of, rather the down south press. I think the Daily Express and the Daily Mail and the Sunday Times have given you most of your coverage. But it's really only when it started hitting the media quite big time that you actually got sued. So the chilling effect was there with the threats to litigate long before we actually found ourselves in court. Yeah,
well, I mean, first of all, congratulations, Don, in not being intimidated. Some of us up here in Scotland who argue for independence are quite used to being intimidated by companies, but it's not a pleasant experience. And you have to be commended for taking the brave stance that you have done. I'm involved in an organisation called Salvo, and when Ewan mentioned there the Crown Estate involvement in this, we first heard of your case and we were quite interested because of the fact that the Crown Estate was potentially involved. Unfortunately, at the time, your case was already underway, and you obviously had created your own case without going into these various factors. But it created an interest for us in the overall case, whether ordinary people had the right to overturn the ambitions of these multinational companies. So, where do you see this going from now, Don? Are you feeling quite confident about the future?
Yeah, I'm feeling extremely confident. I'm really thankful for my legal team. And I think, they say in the music business, where there's a hit, there's a writ. And I think, the truth always wins out in the end. I think it's really interesting that you've got, I'm a Scouser from Liverpool. I'm a Sassenach in the Scottish courts trying to defend public navigation on the west coast of Scotland against a Norwegian multinational. If you go down to Chelsea, the old rectory is owned by John Frederickson. He's the man behind Maui. He earned €1 billion in 2022. He's like 130th on the rich list, the Forbes billionaire list at $14 billion. He's got slightly more money than I have. So this is it's a big fight. But I think whether I win, lose, or draw in court, I think I'll win in the court of public opinion. And as Ewan said, in terms of SLAPP suits, there's maybe 4 or 5 legal arguments that the multinational, the big Goliath goes in on. And earlier this month in court, I think Maui pretty much fell on its sword in 3 of those. So there's only really 1 legal argument left. So I'll see how it goes this year. It might go into 2025, but I'm really appreciate the support financially and in terms of the media and in terms of this podcast, because I think the public should know about this case, because this is not just John Frederickson against Don Staniford. This has implications for open water swimmers, kayakers, fishermen, creel fishermen, everyone on the coast.
Yep, I wasn't slow to. I qualify under the fishermen. I've always liked to fish, and I recognise the importance and the great anger among some salmon fishermen in Scotland at the damage fish farming's done in terms of the lice and all the disease they've introduced, and also the communities in the West Coast where there's definitely pollution problems, serious pollution problems to the seabed. And you would have hoped that organisations like the Crown Office, who benefit from the revenues from these, would spend some of it in actually keeping the seabed and other species protected. But they don't, and that's part of the problem. So, I think, Ewan, is there anything you want to say? We're coming to the end of the programme. Is there anything you'd like to say that I've missed out here?
I don't think so. I think that we've given people a reasonable introduction to the concept of a SLAPP. I think that it is important to recognise that we have public assets in Scotland. We've got the gigantic area of seabed, and it's terribly difficult to keep it, to monitor it and to watch what's going on there. And I don't blame public bodies at all. They're very seriously stretched financially just now. And you mentioned the hacking of the complete computer system, and SEPA was shut down. At the parliamentary inquiry into salmon farming a few years ago, the concept of a citizen scientist came to the surface for the first time. And it actually came from the Marine Laboratory at Staniford. One of the professors there said, "We're incredibly grateful to citizen scientists. Guys like us are not really activists. We didn't set out in life to be activists. I've spent a lifetime in small boats on the water, sailing around the West Coast, and I've seen the damage done. I see the plastic piled up on the shores, and we can notify the authorities if we see some guy dredging the seabed where it's a protected area and he's not allowed to be. And we do, in fact, and people take photographs and they take video of what's going on. And without the involvement of ordinary citizens, nobody really can be expected. The government can't be expected to do this work. And they have to recognise that people like Dawn are a massive contributor to what's going on. And I really hope that politicians watch podcasts like this, watch the video that's going out. It's not faked. When we started at first, they used to say that the seabed dredging was faked, but it ain't faked. I've been on a dive boat when the divers were down. It's absolutely genuine, and it's fundamentally important work. And it's fundamental that we do not allow these foreign multinationals to take all the profit goes offshore. It's all stashed away. The guy's got a Cypriot passport. It's all stashed away offshore. Don't believe the story that it's a major industry that is actually benefiting Scotland to any significant financial extent. So that's my postscript to today's chat. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ewan. Dawn, quite rightly, you should have the last word.
I just think people should wake up to the fact that salmon farming is ethically bankrupt. It's environmentally bankrupt. And you have the power. You might not be in court taking on Maui, but you go to a supermarket like Sainsbury's and Tesco. If you see Maui salmon, don't buy it. If you see Scottish salmon, turn the packet over, look for the word farmed, and just throw it in the bin, not your shopping basket. We all have power as consumers, and we need to exert that power and just tell Maui and other Norwegian multinationals to fish off.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Can I just end this most enjoyable podcast by urging you, the viewers, if you've got a few pounds, if you've got a little bit of money, there'll be a graphic coming up which is a link to Dawn's crowdfunder to help fund his legal action here. It's terribly important that folks stand up for our freedoms and don't just roll over and allow these multinationals a free field to do what they like with our resources. We need to defend them. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the programme, and we'll be back sometime with another story. Thank you.